Hello everybody, today we're going to take a look at the multicolored commanders coming to Final Fantasy and a bit of my analysis, what I believe are going to be the best performing ones. Let's begin, starting with Choco, Seeker of Paradise. Is a 4 mana, 3/5 legendary creature bird, and whenever one or more birds you control attack, look at that many cards from the top of your library. You may put one of them into your hand, then put any number of land cards among them onto the battlefield, tap, and the rest into your graveyard. Plus, he has landfall whenever a land you control enters. Choco gets +1/+0 until end of turn. This is a pretty interesting bird commander. There are already other bird commanders in Azorius and also in Bat. But Choco is quite interesting because it has full synergy with birds. For standard Brawl there's significantly more limitations because there are just not that many. But once you go into Brawl, you have many choices. And if we check in Arena, you have more than enough one-cost birds, which is the target mana cost you want for this type of deck, to just play them early, ramp up as well, play your commander, and then play enchantments. We have curiosity effects that we enchant our bird. We give them, when they do damage to an opponent, you draw a card. And because they have evasion, it becomes significantly easier to proc that effect. Invasion of Gobokan is also pretty good in these type of effects. One of the disadvantage of bird decks is they do a bit of chip damage early, but they tend to just not matter because you just have quite a bit of HP. But now if those birds are hitting an invasion and then making the entire team stronger, it becomes very powerful. And the draw effects gives you a lot more options. These type of bird decks are very reactionary, where your main goal is to disrupt your opponent while you're doing chip damage with birds. One of the big disadvantages with birds is you just don't do too much damage early game, and you need to draw to those anthems, such as favorable winds, your draw effects, and have interaction up, either in the form of enchantments to deal with permanents on the battlefield, or counterspells to deal with a board wipe or a giant creature you just can't handle. As that is another of the limitation of bird decks, they're just big creatures with reach. You have to deal with them or they'll just tear through your team. There is already a commander with flyers, which is the Revi, but the Revi is very high in the queue, and he's pretty disruptive. So you want to play a bit more of a lower power level commander, the Choco does quite well. And one of the advantages is because if you get the landfall effect, not only Choco becomes quite strong, but you get significant number of lands. You thin them out from your deck. Any sort of landfall triggers will occur, and you can afford playing the more expensive birds. Is normally in bird decks you want to be very low to the ground, but you can have in these type of deck a bigger payoff of larger creatures that pump your team or extra turn spells because you're in blue to just finish a game on the spot. For the next commander is Serra Farron. So for Serra, let's go here. So for Serra, we're gonna read her first. Serra Farron is a 3 mana 2/2 legendary creature human citizen. Is the first legendary creature you cast each turn costs 2 less to cast. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 2 or more other legendary creatures, you may transform Serra Farron. So Serra becomes Crystallized Serra. It's a legendary artifact, and the first legendary creature spell you cast each turn costs 2 less, so it now becomes an artifact form. And legendary creatures you control get +2/+2. So the idea with a deck like this is has several legendary creatures. They're going to be cheap to cast, and then that transforms Serra into Crystallized Serra into artifact form, making it significantly more difficult to deal with. And now you have this full discount deck for your deck. In Brawl, there are many options to play in legendary spells. My suggestion would be a mix between early game creatures. There's not that many on one because this commander would really care to transform quickly because that way she can avoid getting just instantly removed. And you have your payoffs. And for payoffs would be creatures that have generic mana cost 2, so they get discounted and they become pretty cheap to cast. Also, like cards like Sigarda that gives your other permanents hexproof and forces your opponent to deal with Sigarda first, then be able to deal with your enchantments. There's also Sigarda Host of Herons, which gives the important text is spells and abilities your opponents control can cause you to sacrifice permanents. So it goes around permanent sacrifice effects, which is quite useful. And you have big payoffs like Kogla, Galta, Buxton. Buxton can also tap multiple creatures when you convoke them, or you're going on offense and then another big friend. There are many options to play with a deck like this. But I would say the big mix would be early game creatures to transform Serra, then with your payoffs, and because this commander costs 3 exactly, and you're in white, there are many ways to also bring her back. So you can do a setup, for example, you play Serra, they remove it, you leave it in the graveyard, next turn you can play another creature, so you have 2 legendary creatures. You play a cheap spell that reanimates her, and then you can transform her immediately. So that gives you, pretty much guarantees you your future turns have larger creatures, and they become +2/+2. So it's a very capable deck, and there are many ways around interaction, which is the big strength. Next we got Emer-Selch. Unsundered is a 3-mana 2/4 with Vigilance, and whenever Emer-Selch enters or attacks, draw a card and discard a card. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 14 or more cards in your graveyard, you may transform Emer-Selch. So he becomes, let's see, Hades, Sorcerer of Eld. The legendary creature avatar with Vigilance and Echo of the Lost. During your turn, you may play cards from your graveyard, and if a card or token would be put in your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So the idea with this commander is to fill the graveyard as much as possible, then transform it because it's at the beginning of your upkeep, and then benefit from playing cards from your graveyard. There is the disadvantage that once you transform Emer-Selch, every card you play will be exiled, so you wouldn't be able to naturally fill the graveyard. Because if a card or token we put into your graveyard from anywhere, you can exile it. So that's a disadvantage. Because the mill your future mills will just get instantly exiled, and that is the downside. So the idea is to fill to get pretty much the resources you want into your graveyard, have ways to get specific cards there, and then come off with this commander. The second limitation is getting interacted with, because you have to wait till your upkeep, so you need multiple ways to protect. Fortunately, you're in blue. Blue is very proficient at protecting a creature, either with counter magic, exiling it and returning, giving it hexproof, or even phasing out. So they have many means to protect this commander, but the big challenge is to stall to get to that point where you just mill, you play your commander, and you try to combo off. Next commander is Lightning. Army of One is a 3-mana in Boros, which is red and white. It's a 3/2 with First Strike, Trample, and Lifelink, Human Soldier, and Stagger. When lightning deals combat damage to a player until your next turn, if a source would deal damage to that player or a permanent that player controls, it deals double that damage instead. One of the big advantages you can do, especially if you have other creatures attacking at the same time, Lightning has First Strike, so she'll do her damage first, especially if you get her some ways to give her evasion. She hits the opponent, and then all your other creatures now do double damage. So there are many ways to just finish a game on the spot or leave your opponent very low. One of the big disadvantages of this deck is she has no real evasion, but you do have trample. So if you can get to play this commander during the early game, that trample is going to help you quite a bit. Especially with first strike, you're able to do the player damage and then interact from there. Other instances, one of the advantages of being also in Boros is you have access to quite a bit of removal, especially early game removal because of red. Example, your opponent can't just chump block with a 1/1 to your 3/2 because you're going to get that trample anyway. And if your opponent plays a larger creature, what you can do is use a burn spell. Example, they block with a 6/6. They use a burn. You use a burn spell on that 6/6. It becomes a 3. You get the first strike hit, and then that creature dies. So there are many ways to protect this commander if you're going on offense. The disadvantage would be going on defense. There's quite a bit of removal. The 3 mana slot in Boros is highly competitive. There are many commanders that compete for a spot like this. So playing Lightning Army of 1 instead of another Boros commander becomes quite difficult. But the payoffs are pretty much there. Is if you have a board, you give Lightning Haste or a way to evade, you can hit, and then the next spells will just do so much damage, and you can, in 1 or 2 turns, you can win a game. It also incentivize early game removal, which you already want to do in this color combination. So this commander can absolutely work. The big challenge is, would Lightning Army of 1 be better than the prevalent Boros commanders? Next card, Spira's Punishment. It's a 7 mana in Sultai, which is black, green, blue, 7/7 Leviathan Avatar with flying. And when Sin enters or attacks, exile a permanent card from your graveyard at random. Then create a tap token that's a copy of that card. If the exile card is a land, repeat that process. The important keyword here is a permanent. So you can miss if you're hitting a non-permanent. Example would be instants or sorceries, and that would be the biggest limitation. Is you do this payoff, you play this commander, and it exiles an instant and sorcery, as you're not going to get token. It's one of the few ways you can miss. So a way to play with this is just not run instants and sorceries, and just all your interaction and all your cards are permanents. So it can be artifacts, enchantments, creatures, even planeswalkers. So as long as it's not instant sorceries, even lands are okay because you get to repeat and you get a token. You can get the full value of this commander. And because if it's entered, even if you got instantly removed, as long as this commander doesn't get countered, you're going to get some sort of value. Even hitting land can pay for its commander tax for future turns. So this commander really can work very well as just a full Sultai ramp. You play your Spira's Punishment, and you can get cards out. Also, Sultai works very well with a mill package, as you can just mill quite a bit of permanence. You can also send specific cards to the graveyard. And then when you play your commander, you have many sources to work with. Also, Spira's Punishment also works very well with creatures that get discounted with artifacts or creatures in the graveyard. And because this commander is incentivized to do it, you get to have other payouts for filling your graveyard. This is a commander that's quite flexible. The big challenge would be, do you have just enough time to get there? Because 7 mana, it takes quite a bit of time. You would need to have a turn 1 elf, turn 2 ramp spell, and turn 3 ramp as well. So you need 3 consecutive turns to ramp, which leaves just 1 turn to set up your mill. Pretty much would be on your 3rd turn. You want to fit in the mill. You have some cheap mill spells. You may be able to play it on turn 2 because there are 2 mana ramps. Pretty much leaving your window for payouts very difficult, and that would be the big challenge, is being able to do that setup on time without just losing the game. Next, you got Vivi Ordinary is a 3-mana 0/3 in Izzet, which is blue and red. It's a legendary creature wizard with 0. Add X mana in any combination of blue and or red, where X is Vivi's Ordinary's power. Activate only during your turn and only once each turn. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Vivi Orniter, and it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Important here, it says activate only during your turn and only once, so you can't do it in your opponent's turn. But this is a pretty powerful Storm Commander. There already are in the format, especially in Brawl, of Storm Commanders that have a very similar effect, and they have seen success in the format. Vivi is an Izzet, so it gives you significantly more options, especially in spells, as this is a commander who really wants to draw very cheap spells, get as many counters on this commander, and be able to have that 0 cost. 2, you just play 0, you get 5-6 mana, and maybe you play an extra turn spell, you can play a board wipe, you can play even more draw to just keep storming and doing damage. There are also several creatures that have this effect of deals 1 damage to your opponent. So with 2 or 3 creatures, it'll take you 10 spells to just, even a bit less, 25 spells to just finish the game. So it's not rare they just win instantly with the correct setup. Other cards that also work very well are cards that draw and give counters to a creature. There's some red spells that do that, because now that 1 mana is netting you 2 mana. As for challenges, would be setting up properly, having the correct card combination where you have enough protection for your commander, but also card draw. Red can help you for the card draw aspect, and blue has quite a bit of protection spells. But the challenge would be how much protection do you need in card draw, because you can very easily run out of cards, and you want to play as many cards as possible during your combo turn with Vivi. That said, this is a commander that can absolutely work. One of the more powerful commanders in the format are the ones that can win without doing creature damage or relying heavily on just doing direct damage to an opponent. This bypasses it, and this allows you to set up. One of the big challenges for many of the ramp decks or late game decks is you just can't let your opponent do the thing, or they have a massive board, which you can just never bypass. These non-combat damage effects really allow you to just cut the middleman and just go directly for lethal. That said, the disadvantages would be is your commander is going to be quite susceptible to removal, as you're giving your opponent that amount of time. Vivi is in blue. Blue really is one of the kings in defense, especially for protecting that creature or their board. And this is a commander that can absolutely get there. We got Yuna, Hope of Spira. Is a 5-mana 3/5 human cleric, and during your turn, Yuna and enchantment creatures you control have trample, lifelink, and ward 2. And at the beginning of your end step, return up to 1 target enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter. There are many enchantment creatures that are quite useful. Example, in white, there is Summon Knights of the Round, which makes this is an 8-mana 3/3 indestructible creature with 5 lore counters, and from 1 to 4 is create 3 white tokens. So you can really take advantage of these type of effects and bring those enchantments back. The big limitation is you are not in colors that can easily mill. Green has some spells, and you definitely would be that type of deck where you want to mill those cards directly from your library, have maybe other artifacts that can discard cards for your hand, and be able to play the commander, get those expensive enchantments from the graveyard to the battlefield, and have those type of effects. One of the big advantages is you have Ward 2 during your turn, which is quite useful. as War 2 means the opponent has to pretty much avoid their turn because they need to have a removal spell and be able to play that war cost. So the opponent's intentions is to just play defense. You will be able to anticipate it, especially if they don't play anything. Fortunately, white and green are colors that have quite a bit of protection. The disadvantage is Yuna costs 5, so you need 6 at least to protect this commander. But with your setup, you are also in colors of board wipe, so you can board wipe into aggro and then play Yuna, protect Yuna, and just go off with the enchantment you're bringing back. So it's a quite powerful commander if he gets to set up, and you're in colors that can absolutely protect this type of effect. Next, we got the Wandering Minstrel. This is a 2-mana 1/3 with Human Bard with lands you control enter untapped, and has the Minstrel's Ballad. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 5 or more towns, create a 2/2 elemental creature tokens that are all colors. And has for 3 and Wooburg, which is all 5 colors, so that'd be 8. Other creatures you control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of towns you control. This is a commander that highly values having multiple towns. Fortunately, you're in all 5 colors because the activated ability is 5 colors. This would be all 5. From the set, there are many cards that search for towns, especially cards that search for multiple lands, multiple towns. There's also the Chocobo that can give you extra lands, landfall triggers, help quite a bit with this type of commander. There are also specific land tutors in green. Green is probably going to be the big color to dive in with these type of deck. And you have the ability to just make multiple creatures to block. The limitation with a deck like this is you're competing directly with Golos that has a similar effect, but its payoff is much stronger. And Golos can specifically search for a town, so it'd be the biggest competition is whether you play a town deck with this commander or with Golos. Another important factor is how high in the queue this commander is. If this commander is a lot lower in the queue, it wouldn't be that bad. Now that we talked about the Wandering Minstrel, let's talk about the lands that are coming with this new set. It's a new land type, which is town. There are many towns that got printed in this set, in commons and uncommons, but let's take a look at the rare lands. There's some particularly interesting cards. So for the first cycle, we have one for each color, the towns that are an adventure spell, where you can cast on one side or play them as land. They are the first adventure spell that come in land form, and there's one for each color. There's the white one that has for a 5 is return up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments from your graveyard to your hand. It's a nice effect, but they all have in common is they're a little bit overcosted for their effects. 5 mana is quite a bit to pay, especially for Brawl. And the downside is you do get a land, but all these lands enter tapped. So that's a big disadvantage for these type of cards. The blue one is for 6. Each target opponent mills half their library rounded down. This is an expensive effect, but is very powerful in Brawl, and it may be worth just the 6 mana. First, is there are ways to search for land specifically and bring them to your hand. And 2, milling half their library is maybe one of the strongest mill effects once you get into 100-card libraries. As Blue has many ways to search artifacts, and they're now in the format artifacts that mill the other half of their deck rounded up. So just this land alone may enable archetypes to go for full mill plans where you just tutor early game, get either a tutor for a land or for there are other cards, especially instants and sorceries, that can mill their library. Other effects, I actually don't know if Solve the Equation can search for this land. I believe it can do its adventure side, but because its main form is a land, most likely not. But if you're in green, green has several ways to search for a land, so now you have an extra way, especially if you're in Simic, to search for this land, mill half their library. You can ramp in the early game, search for the land, mill half their library, and maybe have a tutor for example an artifact, that there are artifacts that can mill the other half and you just win on the spot. So of all the effects, this looks like quite viable. The red one has Mage Siege, which is an instant, an adventure, which created an 0/1 black wizard creature token with whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this token deals 1 damage to each opponent. It's a pinger effect in red. There are many decks in red or in Izzet that like these type of pingers, and having just the versatility of playing it a land or a creature is not bad. Unfortunately, the rate for these creatures are usually for 2, and you're getting a no one, so it just dies to anything, pretty much. This would have been a quite viable land if the adventure spell cost 1 less, but for 3 it may be on the expensive side. That said, this is a good land to have if you don't care about the tap side too much and are willing to discard this effect. Discard, just have an extra land or an instant or sorcery matters deck, or just exile it to a Mox, or there are also other artifacts that would like to exile a card to discount their costs, so it's a good alternative. The black one has Raid Reactor, which is Midgard's Hit of Mako. And for 3, you may sacrifice an artifact or a creature, and if you do, draw 2 cards. Nice effect, but is again a bit overcosted on 3. Normally these effects can cost up to 1 even in Brawl, so paying 3 for this hurts quite a bit. If this land entered untapped, it would be a completely different story for, I would say, all these lands, but having the price to pay just for this to enter tapped is quite high. The green one, which is Xanarcan Ancient Metropolis, with Lasting Faith, with a 6 mana, create a 1/1 colorless creature token, and put a +1/+1 counter on it for each land you control. It is an expensive effect, but you may have a giant creature pretty easily. For example, if all the 6 mana comes from lands, your token is gonna become a 7/7. Unfortunately, the token does not have trample or any other effect, which is a big downside, so you only have a big body, but is a nice payoff for these type of land effects. Another advantage is you can play the Lasting Face side. For example, with the Wandering Minstrel type deck, you play the sorcery side, and you can play the land side as well. So I would say that is the largest advantage. If decks that really care for the adventure side, they get the payoff to also playing the land tap, so they get both effects. Because especially if you haven't played a land for turn, so that's the versatility. But the sacrifice of paying of your land entering tapped is very high. Now, other important towns, I would say starting town may be the most important land to consider from this new format, especially for Brawl, as it has this land enters tapped unless it's your first, second, or third turn of the game. Add colorless, or pay 1 life and add 1 mana of any color. There's this town. Starting town is going to be a staple in the format. Just by reading its text alone, it's just good in every type of deck. Even 2-color decks may just consider it because you have the versatility of just adding a colorless if you need to. The 2-color decks also really like running Painlands because of the versatility of adding a colorless and the advantage of your first 3 turns are usually your most important turns in any game of Brawl for it coming tapped later on. Normally by turn 4 or 5, you're just happy if you hit a land drop, tapped or untapped by that point in the game. You just don't want to be missing lands, so you're okay if this land enters tapped. And having the versatility of even going first or second, which there are a lot of alchemy cards that are focused if you went second to come in untapped, is quite useful. So any deck that really has an extra color or multicolor decks will just auto include this card, and it's going to be legal in standard brawl as well. I wouldn't be surprised if nearly every single standard brawl deck would just include this starting town, especially as they are missing in quite a few dual lands. Shock lands, for example, they don't have access to, or the fetch lands. There's a versatile card to be included in any multicolored deck. Next, we got Balam Garden Seed Academy, which is it's an instant Simic, which is this land enters tapped, and it taps for a green or a blue, and has seven mana, and transform this land. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each town you control, and it becomes a vehicle, which is Balam Garden Airborne, and it's a 5/4 with crew 1 flying, and whenever Balam Garden attacks, you draw a card. So it's a quite useful effect and is one of these best statted vehicles out there. 5/4 is a really good stat, and crew 1 is as cheap as it gets. And this is definitely now to include any type of town deck, town commander. For example, the Wandering Minstrel will really like a card like this, and you have a bit of a payoff. The disadvantage is this land will enter tap, so that means even if you have the mana to pay, unless you have a Spelunking in your battlefield, which makes your lands enter untapped, you wouldn't be able to activate its effect. But if you found a way to give it come in untapped and have enough towns, you can just pay 2, transform it immediately, and you have a blocker or a vehicle to go for offense on future turns. So it has quite good synergies. Green has ways to make come untapped. It's an interesting card, but outside of town decks, I don't really see this card seeing that much play. Maybe Simon decks just want any sort of multicolored card, it's okay. But for Brawl outside of town decks, it's not going to see any play. Now, let's go for artifacts. I wanted to mention just 2 artifacts that are quite useful. One is World Map. It has synergy as well with your town decks. It has 1 to search for a basic land. But the important one is for 3 and tap, when you sacrifice this artifact, search your library for a land card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. So any deck that wants to search for a specific land, either for a combo or just they are example, a town deck, then one very niche card, you can search for it. There is no restriction to the land. This may also be useful maybe if you're a deck that really cares to search for Cavern of Souls. You can play this and in a future turn sacrifice it, get search your Cavern of Souls and play it. It is a bit of a premium you have to pay for, 1 and then 3, so 4 mana in total. But it's not a bad effect. Unfortunately, it would be a staple in the format if that land entered immediately, but it doesn't. So it's very slow. So I would say it's a card to really consider if you really care for a specific land type, but I don't think every commander should play this card. It's just the very specific land matter type decks. Finally, we got the Buster Sword. Is a 3 mana equipment with equip 2 and has equipped creature gets +3/+2. And whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Then you may cast a spell from your hand with mana value less than or equal to the damage without paying its mana cost. So of course, this card in Commander is going to be very powerful, but how useful it is in Brawl. If the swords that were not legal in both formats, either Brawl or Standard Brawl, Buster Sword would be a staple. The problem is it has to compete with those swords, and they have the same rate. They cost 3, and the equip cost is 2. Those swords have 2 advantages. For example, let's say you have the Izzet sword. The Izzet sword gives you protection from blue and from red, and when you hit the opponent, I also believe it's +2/+2, and when you hit the opponent, you draw a card and you do 2 damage to any target. That's a very high quality equipment, and even in equipment decks, it would be just the premier equipment to search for. Buster Sword has the advantage to draw and to discount. The disadvantage is there is really not a big equipment commander I can think of that wants to just play very expensive spells. Normally, the restriction is their equip cost is quite high, or they would just get another equipment into the battlefield, which is fine, but first of all, they have to have it in their hand or draw into it. But what if they just have ramp or an interaction spell that they want to, for example, protection spell? If it's a removal, it would be nice. But if they don't have interaction or a card they want to play, they're losing on this effect. One of the disadvantages, of course, competing with the swords is the swords gives you protection. So if they have a blocker of the colors of that sword, they can't block it anymore. And any instant or removal spell in those colors cannot target that sword wielder. So Buster Sword really has quite a large competition. I would say it is a bit more viable in Standard Brawl as there's only 2 swords, but they're very good. There's the Gruul sword and the Izzet one. The Dimir one sees a bit of play, but for Brawl, the competition is quite fierce. It has to be a very specific deck, or you have to set up your deck in a way to take advantage of the Buster Sword. For example, if you're playing Cloud that can tutor up for a weapon, they may be a scenario you do want the Buster Sword. So I would say this has a lot more value in decks, for example, are in Celestia, because Celestia can search for creatures. And you want to search for Cloud, for example, or Mystic Forge, and then you can choose, is it the right time to play this weapon? But in decks that don't specifically search for an equipment tutor, and you naturally draw an equipment, I would say Buster Sword is not that useful, or is very niche to its scenario to be good. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Comment below which commanders are you looking for this new set. Thanks for watching.